Oftentimes, it's hard to convince the people because they think drugs have been the problems in their community. They can give you some anecdote about some relative, some loved one who drugs destroyed. And then you have to help them to see what the real problems were. And that's some work that needs to be done first. Like, really, it's about human dignity. It's about jobs. It's about all of these things. And so you have to help people to understand what's really going on. And that's some work that really is hard, but it needs to be done.
Can you tell us a little bit about your kind of personal journey of realizing that drug policy reform was an important conversation to have?
Yeah, so I started studying drugs because I thought it was a drug problem. I thought drugs were the problem in communities like the one from which I came. And so I dedicated my life to try to combat drug addiction. In the course of that study, I gave drugs to people in a lab, and I studied the effects and published tons of papers on this. And one day it just kind of occurred to me that I've been given drugs like crack cocaine, methamphetamine, all these drugs that were vilified in society. And when I give them in the lab, people have a great time. They enjoy themselves. In some cases, you give a drug like MDMA and the research participants start to tell you how much they love you, and it's in thinking about how society views drugs and then this sort of experience that we've had in the lab after giving thousands of doses of these drugs, they just didn't mix, they didn't match. And so I then tried to say that, hold up, something's wrong. And then other researchers would not really want to talk about this disconnect, in part because we got grants, lots of money to study drugs, and we got lots of prestige. We published papers because, you start off by saying in your papers, oh, cocaine is a public health problem. Oh, heroin is a public, you say this nonsense, it is a problem for some people. So I don't want to downplay that. But you start off saying that and you conclude your paper with the same sort of stuff. No matter what you find, you start off saying what a horrible public health problem this is, and you end by saying the same thing, no matter what you find. But we overwhelmingly found positive effects, but we weren't really saying this. And so of course, I knew like my community was disproportionately negatively affected by drug policy. Lots of people were arrested. It gave police license to come in our community and act like the Gestapo. People like George Floyd would be harmed or killed and then police could say that he was on drugs or they were worried about drugs, like with Breonna Taylor. They break in her house and shoot up her place because they're looking for somebody who deals drugs. Are you kidding? But that's okay in our society. And me as a scientist, seeing this and knowing what we were finding, it's like, this is wrong. And so I had to figure out a way to communicate with a broader audience, not only just the scientific community, to publicize that there's this vast inconsistency in terms of what we think about drugs and then what drugs actually do.
If you are opening up conversations with people about this tricky topic, what are some ways that you've used to kind of open people's minds or start these kind of conversations?
So it all depends on who we're talking to, right? The UK used to be a leader in this area, and now the UK is probably, it's quite far behind in this area. And so I don't really like talking drugs in the UK because it's like going back to prehistoric time, actually. So I try to help people to understand. We think about homosexuality and how slow the society was to accept same-sex love. Even though we were slow as a society to accept that, it doesn't mean that those folks who were gay, lesbian, it doesn't mean that their humanity was any less than when we didn't accept it as a society. Their humanity was still the same as yours and mine. Just because we now recognize, oh, that was wrong to discriminate against folks like that because of their choices. The same is true with drugs. Just because our society don't accept the fact that some people like to get high, they take drugs to alter their consciousness, doesn't mean that their humanity is any less. Their humanity is the same as our own. And they should have the choice to do as such. Although, people bring into this conversation all of these issues, like, what if they rob someone? What if they hurt someone? What if they hurt themselves? What if they bring all these irrelevant topics in? We have laws for against if people rob someone, if they harm someone. There are laws on the books. Most people who use drugs don't engage in all of that behavior. And so people bring into the issue, what about the children? What about this? So the first thing one has to do is to make sure that you stay on topic, because people try and take you off topic and bring in irrelevant information. We have to think about it in the same way we use alcohol. Of course, we know we have problems with alcohol with some people. Some people overindulge, but the vast majority of people don't overindulge. And so that tells you that the problem is not alcohol. The problem is beyond the drug itself, and we have to look at these other factors if we're focusing on the problems. That's another trick that happens with drugs. Invariably, people try to get you to focus on the negative things, drug addiction, overdose, when the negative things represent a smaller proportion than all of these vast positive things that people get from drugs. And so with the new book, one of the things I say at the outset, I am not focused on drug addiction. Because drug addiction has received a disproportionate amount of attention.
Yeah.
And when the folks that you're talking to try to put you in that sort of negative drug effects box, it's a trick. It's a rhetorical trick. It's a trick in terms of argument. And so you have to be aware of that trick. And so you have to say, you have to know that the vast majority of people who use drugs don't become addicted. And so you're going to focus on this larger majority, how to keep them safe, how to help them enhance the time that they're seeking from drugs. And you have to unapologetically be able to say that. One of the things with the harm reduction folks, the term itself, harm reduction, it's only used in the drug world.
Yeah.
So when we drive our automobiles, we put on seat belts.
That's harm
reduction. We brush our teeth, harm reduction. Nobody calls it harm reduction. You only pair harm with drugs, harm, drugs, harm with drugs. And that pairing, constant pairing, shapes how we think about drugs. It shapes how we behave, all of these things. And so in the new book, I'm asking people to reconsider that term. And also really think about what you're doing in terms of harm reduction. Most people are not seeking drugs using drugs to reduce harm. They're using drugs to enhance some sort of pleasure or something related. And so I'm trying to keep the focus on the positive things. And so that helps hopefully help to get the society to think about drugs different. Like when you go into these different communities, oftentimes it's hard to convince the people on whose behalf you are trying to work, because drugs have been the problems in their communities. That this is how I came to this work. I thought drugs were the problem. And so they can give you some anecdote about some relative, some loved one who drugs destroyed. And then you have to help them to see what the real problems were. And that's some work that needs to be done first. And that work, it's hard because they don't see all the things that you know and have seen. So you have to help them to understand. Like, really, it's about human dignity. It's about jobs. It's about all of these things. If you have all those things, you have to convince them or show them. Because, like in the US, I'm sure in the UK, around the world, like in Black communities, some Black communities, they say, oh, crack cocaine destroyed the Black community. And then you have to show them, like, hold up, there was far more crack in white communities, far more drugs in white communities. Are those communities destroyed? And so you have to walk them through this slowly so they understand, because all they see is crack. And that was the problem. And the movies, the documentary films, the media, they tell them it was crack in order to, again, uphold the status quo. And then the politicians don't have to address the real underlying issues. It's always about jobs. It's always about dignity. But the politicians, they don't really want to deal with those sorts of things, particularly now, like in the UK, you all have these job issues. Part of the reason you have regular is because these people need something to blame, and drugs are always convenient to blame. And so you have to help people to understand what's really going on. And that's some work that really is hard, but it needs to be done, because if you don't have those people on your side, then it's harder to convince everyone else.
You talk to me.